He fired me, without warning after 7 years of building his family business just to replace me with his stunning secretary. But what he didn't know, I wasn't just his wife, I was also the majority shareholder. While they were busy sneaking around, I was preparing a move that would leave them jobless, humiliated, and completely broke. Want to know how I took everything back? Keep listening. For 7 years, I devoted myself to my husband's family business. I wasn't just a manager. I was the engine that kept the whole operation running. I streamlined processes, brought in new clients, managed the staff, and even smoothed over his screw-ups when he made careless decisions. I poured my heart into that company because I believed in building something together. But I should have known better. That morning started like any other. I arrived early, coffee in hand, reviewing our monthly reports and prepping for the executive meeting. The office was unusually quiet, but I brushed it off as just a slow morning. Then, around 9:00 a.m., my husband, Jake, walked in wearing a smug expression I'd never seen before. Behind him stood his secretary, Vanessa, dressed like she was headed to a cocktail party, not a workplace. He asked to speak to me in private. We walked into the conference room, and the second the door closed, he slid a folder across the table toward me. "We're letting you go," he said coldly. "It's time for some fresh leadership." I blinked, stunned. "What the hell are you talking about, Jake?" "I'm restructuring," he replied, like it was no big deal. "It's business. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal," I said, laughing bitterly. "You're firing your own wife without a single warning." He didn't even flinch. "You'll receive a generous severance package." Then, as if that wasn't cruel enough, Vanessa walked in and smiled. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of the team." That's when it clicked. The late nights, the last-minute meetings, the way she'd started speaking to me with fake sympathy and hidden smugness, it all made sense. They were sleeping together. I didn't say a word. Not then. I walked out of that office with my head high, but my heart was burning. They thought they'd outplayed me. They thought they were finally free to run the company and their affair without me in the way. But they had forgotten something. The company had originally been founded by Jake's grandfather, who had great respect for me. Years ago, when Jake and I got married, his grandfather insisted we sign a marital agreement that included provisions for the business. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to support my husband. But I remembered the document. I remembered the clause about company shares. So while Jake and Vanessa celebrated my exit, I went home and pulled out the safe in my closet. Inside was a dusty sealed envelope, our prenuptial agreement, and the original shareholder certificates. My hands shook as I read through them. And there it was. I was listed as a 51% shareholder. The majority. I couldn't believe it. All these years, I had power I didn't even realize I still had. Suddenly, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the boss. That night I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I made a plan. I called a lawyer friend I trusted, one who had helped me once in a real estate matter. I asked him to review the documents and confirm everything. He did, and he smiled. Technically, he said you can walk back into that office tomorrow and fire them both. But I wasn't going to be that predictable. No, I wanted them to feel it. So, over the next 2 weeks, I met quietly with the board members, people I'd built real relationships with over the years. I reminded them who had actually grown the business, who had built the client network, who had implemented the systems that made them money. Most of them were shocked to hear I'd been fired. None of them were aware Jake had done it behind their backs. Their support came quickly. I also met with our key clients, letting them know I was working on something new, and that I hoped they'd stick with me. Many of them said they'd follow me wherever I went. I had leverage, I had backing, and most of all, I had the legal right to reclaim what was mine. By the time I walked back into that office 3 weeks later, Jake looked like he had seen a ghost. Vanessa barely managed a smile, clearly nervous. I called for a company-wide meeting in the conference room. Every employee showed up. I stood at the front and smiled. "Hi, everyone. I'm sure you've all heard rumors about my departure. I'd like to clarify that I was never officially removed from my position as majority shareholder. In fact, based on the legal documents and board support, I'm here to announce some changes." The room was dead silent. Effective immediately, Jake and Vanessa are terminated for misconduct and breach of internal ethics. Gasps filled the room. Jake stood up, shouting, "You can't do this, but I already had the papers. The legal authority, the board's vote." "Oh, but I can," I said calmly. "And I just did." They never saw it coming. And this was just the beginning. Jake's face turned beet red. His mouth opened like he had more to say, but nothing came out. Vanessa stood frozen beside him, clutching her designer handbag, like it could shield her from what was happening. Her confident, flirtatious smirk gun. "You're making a mistake," Jake finally snapped. "This is just revenge." "No," I replied calmly. "This is accountability. Something you clearly don't understand." I turned to the employees, many of whom looked stunned. A few. However, those who had been with the company since the early days gave me small, supportive nods. They knew the truth. They had seen who really built this place. Vanessa stepped forward. "You can't just ruin our careers like this." I raised an eyebrow. "You slept with your boss and helped him fire his wife, your direct superior, so you could take her job. That's not a career, Vanessa. That's manipulation. And it ends today." I handed them both their formal termination letters, legally signed and backed by the board. "Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to gather your things." Jake tried to storm past me, but I stepped in front of him. "By the way, the company car, laptop, and phone, they stay." He glared at me like he was about to explode, but there was nothing he could do. His authority was gone. Mine was just beginning. That day was a turning point. After Jake and Vanessa were escorted out, I met privately with the rest of the executive team. There was tension, of course, and questions, but I didn't shy away from the truth. "I know this transition was unexpected," I told them, "but we're entering a new era, one built on transparency, respect, and merit, not favoritism and backroom deals." Some were skeptical, but many were relieved. Several employees even approached me afterwards to say they'd been uncomfortable with how Jake had been running things, especially once Vanessa came into the picture. Productivity had dropped, turnover had increased, and clients were starting to notice. I spent the next few weeks cleaning up the mess Jake left behind. Financial records were a disaster. He had approved bonuses for himself and Vanessa that were completely unjustified. He had been funneling company funds into expensive dinners and luxury weekend getaways disguised as business trips. One look at the expense reports confirmed everything. I documented it all, then turned it over to our corporate attorney. If Jake tried to sue me or claim wrongful termination, I wanted every receipt in place. But here's the kicker. Jake underestimated how deep his betrayal would cut, not just with me, but with his own family. His mother, who had always been suspicious of Vanessa, called me personally after she heard what happened. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't raise him to be this way. If his grandfather were alive, he'd be ashamed." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh, but I appreciated the support. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake fired me from his family's business, only for his own family to back me in the end. Then came the fallout. Jake tried to retaliate by filing a wrongful dismissal complaint, but it didn't go far. His affair with Vanessa, combined with the evidence of misused company funds, destroyed any chance he had. The board issued a formal statement supporting my decision, and the press caught wind of it. Suddenly, Jake wasn't just an ex-executive. He was a disgraced one. Vanessa, meanwhile, tried to spin her side of the story online, painting herself as a victim of a jealous wife. But no one bought it, especially after screenshots of her private messages with Jake, leaked messages full of cruel jokes about me, plans to push me out, and fantasies of running the company together, like some kind of twisted power couple. They lost not just their jobs, but their reputations. No one wanted to hire them. No one wanted to work with them. And the worst part for them, I never had to lie, manipulate, or smear their names. I just exposed the truth. With the company back on solid ground, I rebranded. I updated our image, restructured the leadership team, and implemented better employee support systems. For the first time in years, the workplace felt alive again. Motivated, loyal. But it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. For so long, I had let my identity be tied to Jake, his wife, his business partner, his fixer. But now, I was standing on my own, as a leader, a survivor, a woman who didn't just walk away from betrayal, she turned it into a comeback. And if that wasn't satisfying enough... A few months later, I received an email from Jake. Subject: can we talk? I stared at the screen for a full minute before opening it. I've had time to reflect. I made some horrible mistakes. I miss you. I miss what we had. I was stupid. Please, can we just talk? I didn't even respond. He had already said everything I needed to hear by losing me. After I read Jake's email, I sat there in silence. Can we talk? He wrote as if a conversation could undo the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation. He had destroyed everything we built together, then tried to crawl back the moment his world collapsed. But I didn't need closure. I had already closed the door. No slamming, no yelling, just silence. That was more powerful than any revenge. Still, part of me wondered, what did he think would happen? That I'd forget the way he looked me in the eye and fired me without warning, that I'd ignore the fact he replaced me with a woman he had been sleeping with behind my back, that I'd go back to being the woman who cleaned up his messes and swallowed her pain for the sake of keeping the peace. No. That woman was gone. The months after reclaiming the company were transformative, but they weren't easy. I had been so focused on survival, on staying strong, that I hadn't really allowed myself to feel. One morning, I walked into my newly renovated office, sat in my leather chair, and just stared at the empty space around me. The desk, the plants, the books all chosen by me. Everything was mine. But for the first time since it all happened, I let the emotions crash over me. I cried, not just because of Jake, or Vanessa, or even the betrayal. I cried because I had been so afraid to feel weak. I forgot that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's proof you survived. And I had survived. Therapy helped. A lot. I started seeing a therapist once a week, someone objective who didn't know my past, who could help me sort through the chaos in my head. At first, I resisted opening up. I was used to being in control, holding everything together. But week by week, I unpacked the pain, the resentment, the way I had sacrificed parts of myself to make Jake feel like a man. He had always needed to be the one in charge. At parties, he'd interrupt me or correct me when I spoke about business. At home, he'd roll his eyes whenever I brought up ideas. In meetings, he'd take credit for things I had done. I told myself he was just insecure and that it wasn't worth the fight. But now I saw it for what it was: emotional erosion. Bit by bit, year by year, he chipped away at my confidence, until the day he fired me and set me free. Outside of work, I started doing things I had long abandoned. I took a painting class. I joined a weekend hiking group. I even traveled solo to Greece, a dream I had shelved for some day when things slowed down. Standing on a sunlit cliffside in Santorini, watching the blue horizon stretch forever, I realized I hadn't just gotten my life back. I had finally claimed it. Meanwhile, Jake's world continued to unravel. Mutual friends told me he was living in a rented apartment on the outskirts of town. No job. No income. Vanessa had left him shortly after he ran out of money. Apparently, she thought being jobless and disgraced wasn't sexy anymore. He tried to launch a consulting business, but had no clients. Worse, some of the same people who used to kiss up to him at work now ghosted him completely. That's the thing about power, gained through manipulation. It disappears the moment your leverage is gone. And Jake? He had built his empire on sand. But this story isn't about him anymore. It's about the woman I became after the storm. With the company stable, I started mentoring young women in business. I created a scholarship for female entrepreneurs and began hosting monthly workshops on leadership, financial literacy, and workplace boundaries. It was something I wished I had when I was younger, when I thought love meant shrinking myself so someone else could shine. One night, after a workshop, a young woman named Maya came up to me in tears. I was going to quit my job because my boss keeps taking credit for my work. But your story, it reminded me I deserve more. That moment made everything worth it. Then something unexpected happened. At a networking gala, I met someone, Daniel. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to dominate the room. In fact, he approached me with a quiet confidence and a kind smile, complimenting my work and actually listening when I spoke. At first, I kept my distance. My walls were high, and for good reason. But Daniel didn't push. He was patient, respectful, curious, but never invasive. We started meeting for coffee, then dinners, then long walks after work, talking about everything from business to art to childhood memories. For the first time, I felt seen not for what I could do, but for who I was. One evening, I told him the whole story: the betrayal, the company, the comeback. I watched his face carefully, expecting judgment or discomfort. But instead he said, "That's one of the most powerful things I've ever heard. You didn't just survive. You turned it into something bigger than yourself. That's incredible." I felt something I hadn't felt in years, safe. Now, a year after Jake fired me, my life looks completely different. The company is thriving. I'm in love with someone who respects me. I'm mentoring women who are building dreams of their own. And me, I'm finally living the life I deserved all along. Jake once thought he was breaking me, that replacing me would make him feel powerful. But in the end, I wasn't the one who lost everything. He was. And the best part, I never needed to destroy him to win. I just needed to rebuild myself. It had been over a year since Jake fired me and handed my job to his mistress. A year since I flipped the script, exposed the truth, reclaimed the company, and rebuilt my life from the ashes of betrayal. I thought I had closed every door that ever led back to that part of my life. But then one rainy afternoon, the past came knocking literally. I was working late reviewing proposals for our latest mentorship program when the receptionist called up. "There's a man downstairs asking to see you," she said quietly. "He won't give his name, but he says you'll know him." I felt a chill. Part of me already knew. I told her to send him up. Jake stepped into my office like a ghost. He was thinner than I remembered. His once slick hair was now messy and graying. His suit, though still expensive, looked worn at the seams like a costume from a life he no longer belonged to. "Hi," he said, voice low. "Jake." I kept my tone neutral. "I'm surprised you came here. I didn't know where else to go." He sat down without waiting for an invitation. I didn't stop him. I just folded my hands, watching him. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything he started, but I need your help, the audacity. This man humiliated me, cheated, fired me from my own job, let his mistress take credit for my work, and now, after losing everything, he came back to me. I didn't say anything. I let him speak. "I've been trying to start over," Jake admitted, "but no one wants to work with me. The lawsuit, the press, it ruined my name. I burned every bridge." He looked at me with genuine desperation. "I just need a second chance." I gave a small laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You want a second chance? From the woman you betrayed, lied to, cheated on, fired, and humiliated. You want me to save you?" He winced. "I know how it sounds, but you always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it." "You're right," I said coldly. "I used to, but I've changed." He stared at me for a moment, maybe trying to recognize the woman sitting across from him, the one he thought would always be beneath him, obedient, forgiving, quiet. But she didn't exist anymore. "I'm not here to fix your life, Jake," I said. "You made choices. Now, you're living the consequences." He swallowed hard. "So, that's it." "You won't help. I did help," I replied. "When I stood by your side for years. When I ran your business. When I covered your mistakes. You chose to throw that away." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or shame. "I don't hate you," I added softly. "But I'm not responsible for you anymore." Jake left quietly. I watched him walk out of the office. Shoulders slumped the sound of his footsteps, fading like the final echo of a chapter that no longer defined me. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just peace. Later that night, I told Daniel about the visit. We were having dinner at my place, curled up on the couch with wine and take out the city, lights flickering outside the window. He didn't interrupt or react with jealousy. He just listened. When I finished, he nodded. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I really am." Daniel smiled. "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words hit me harder than Jake's entire apology, because they came from someone who saw me, for me not for what I could give, or fix, or endure. Just me. A few weeks later, I received another email. This time not from Jake, but from Vanessa. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to apologize. You didn't deserve any of what happened. Jake made a lot of promises, and I believed him. I see now that I was just a tool for him to feel powerful. I lost everything. And honestly, I think I deserve to. I stared at the screen, unsure what to feel. Forgiveness didn't mean I had to let her back into my life, but I realized I wasn't angry anymore. She was just another pawn in Jake's game, until she wasn't. Until she made a choice, just like I had. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some apologies are just meant to be heard, not answered. The year kept moving forward. We launched our mentorship accelerator and saw record-breaking applications from women across the country. I was invited to speak at leadership conferences, share my story on podcasts, and even collaborate with organizations fighting workplace discrimination and gender bias. One day, after delivering a keynote speech titled "Build Back Better Starting with Yourself," I was approached by a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s. "You have no idea how much your story means to me," she said, tearing up. I was in a toxic relationship with my business partner. I thought I had to stay quiet to keep the peace. But now I know I don't have to. She hugged me tightly before leaving, and I realized this was the full circle moment I never knew I needed. What Jake tried to break became the very thing that gave others strength. One quiet evening, sitting on the patio with Daniel, a glass of wine in hand, I finally asked myself a question I had avoided. Would I change anything? Would I erase the pain, the betrayal, the public humiliation? And surprisingly, the answer was no, because all of it, every scar had shaped me into the woman I was today. Not a victim, not just a survivor, but a builder, a leader, a woman who turned the worst thing that ever happened to her into the foundation for her best life. Jake's chapter in my story had ended long ago, but mine, it was just getting started. Life has a strange way of showing us what we're made of. Sometimes it breaks us down completely, only so we can rebuild into something stronger, sharper, and more unshakable than before. After Jake walked out of my office for the last time, something inside me settled. There was no victory dance, no dramatic moment, just a quiet knowing I had already won. Not because he lost, but because I no longer needed him to lose in order to win. I didn't seek revenge. I built a life he couldn't touch. In the months that followed, everything flourished. The mentorship program exceeded our expectations. One of our first participants, a single mom named Kira, launched her own eco-friendly beauty line and secured funding within 6 months. Watching her walk across the stage at our celebration gala, holding her business plan like it was an award, brought tears to my eyes. "I wouldn't have done this if I hadn't heard your story," she told me. That was it. That was the real legacy. Not the company Jake tried to take from me, not the boardroom battles, but the ripple effect empowering others to choose themselves, even when it's terrifying. At home, my life had found a rhythm of peace. Daniel and I didn't talk about forever. We didn't need to. We built each day with respect, honesty, and laughter. I never felt small around him. I never had to shrink to be loved. He wasn't my savior. He was my partner. One night while watching a movie on the couch, he turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about writing a book?" I laughed. "Why, and you think people want to read about my drama? I think they'd want to read about your strength," he said, "and how you turned betrayal into power." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either, because deep down I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. Jake. I never heard from him again. Eventually, his name stopped coming up in conversation. Even his former friends had moved on. He was no longer a force in my life, just a shadow I had long outgrown. One day, while cleaning out an old storage closet at the office, I found a framed photo of Jake and me from the company's 5th anniversary. We were smiling, laughing, pretending. I stared at it for a second, then placed it face down in a box labeled Archive, Not Needed. Because that chapter was over. Completely. So what now? Now. I dream bigger. I mentor. I invest in women-owned startups. I wake up excited for the day ahead. And more than anything, I live life on my terms. Not to prove anything to anyone. Not to get back at those who doubted me. But because I owe it to the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet, who played nice, who waited to be chosen. She waited too long. So now I choose myself. Every single day. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or broken down, let this be your reminder. You are allowed to rise. And not just rise, but rebuild, reinvent, and reclaim the life that's yours. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more real powerful stories of love, loss, and transformation. Hit the bell so you never miss the next chapter in our family story, My Husband, a series. Your story isn't over yet, and neither is ours.